Today is November 24th, 2021. My name is Rob Carr of Kalamazoo Right to Life, and this is Pro-Life Week. Well, exactly 1 week from today, the Supreme Court will hear oral argument on Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. This is the abortion decision, the case coming out of Mississippi, in which the legislature passed a bill back in 2018 banning abortions after the 15th week of pregnancy, clearly in violation to Roe v. Wade and the Planned Parenthood versus Casey decisions. So all roads lead to Washington in 1 week for the oral argument. In the meantime, pro-lifers all over the country will be staging vigils, prayer services to call up to God, beseech the Lord that He would soften the hearts of the Supreme Court to make the right decision, either to completely ban and overturn Roe v. Wade, or to severely chop it up and chip away at its impregnable wall that has been built for the last 48 years. But today I'm going to be doing a little reading, so forgive me if it distracts you. But back in 2020, Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote in another unrelated opinion, I might add, some explanations of why he thinks that, or how he thinks the courts should or could reverse precedent. There's this doctrine in the courts called stare decisis. It's a Latin term that means let the decision stand. That the courts are very, very reluctant to overturn case law, and they always fall back on previously decided cases as precedent. And obviously Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey are the precedent cases to uphold legal abortion, basically through all 9 months of pregnancy. So he talks about, in general, he talks about 3 kind of overarching considerations that the court might use to overturn previous decisions. And I'll just kind of go through them. The first one is the prior decision not just wrong, but grievously or egregiously wrong? He cites a few cases like Plessy versus Ferguson that was overturned by Brown versus Board of Education, cases that were clearly wrongly decided in the beginning. And I write, pro-life scholars have spent decades amassing reasonable, fact-based, historical, and legal arguments asserting that Roe was egregiously decided. A future Supreme Court would have to be convinced that the evidence presented would be so compelling, this new evidence, so compelling that the court should re-examine Roe. Second, has the prior decision caused significant negative jurisprudential or real-world consequences? Okay, here's where I write again. One could argue that the growth of the pro-life movement and its permanence in American society the past 50 years attests to its belief that Roe is not federal law, is opposed in some degree by nearly half the population. It runs counter to history, past state court precedent, and science. Even in her confirmation hearings in 2020, Amy Coney Barrett said that Roe was not super precedent because, quote, calls for its overturning have never ceased, unquote. And then I add, and the deaths of over 60 million unborn babies since 1973 identifies, quote, real-world consequences, unquote. And third, this is Kavanaugh's top 3, would overruling the prior decisions, overruling Roe, unduly upset reliance interests? This consideration focuses on the legitimate expectations of those who have reasonably relied on the precedent, unquote. Now this is me writing. Arguably, this third consideration is the highest hurdle to jump, since millions of women have come to depend on their liberty to abort. They have unencumbered access to that liberty, have possessed this right for 48 years, take for granted its continuation, have come to rely on its guarantees, and believe that it is foundational to their freedom and privacy. So those are high hurdles, that last category on the reliance, that the women have relied on legal abortion for 48 years, and now the courts could have just kind of chopped this away and stripped this away from that right. So that is an issue that courts going to have to deal with. It is, and I'm not going to deny the fact that they're going to have to think long and hard about overturning Roe. I'm going through pages here to look for another case that I think is very interesting when it comes to how a state court viewed unborn life. Back in 1964, there was a case called Raleigh-Fitkin Paul Morgan Memorial Hospital versus Anderson, New Jersey. And the case was revolving around a woman who was a Jehovah's Witness who was pregnant, and she needed a blood transfusion to save the life of her unborn baby. And because Jehovah's Witnesses refuse blood transfusions as a part of their doctrine, she refused. And the court stepped in and said, we have to compel her to have the blood transfusion to save her unborn baby's life. And the New Jersey Supreme Court ruled against the woman. And they said that she is required to have that blood transfusion. And a pro-life scholar said years later, the woman's right of privacy was subordinated to a more compelling state interest, the unborn infant's life. The next year, there was another case in Illinois, a case called In Re Estate of Brooks, where the court ruled against compulsory blood transfusions. There was another case, Jehovah's Witness person refused to have a blood transfusion, and the hospital lost the case. Why did the woman win her case? She was not pregnant. According from this legal scholar again, quote, only the right to life of a live human being, the unborn child as a legal person, could have prevailed over the pregnant woman's right of free religious exercise. You know, the court in Roe v. Wade, they never brought up that Raleigh-Fitkin case. Never. They never hardly talked about state case law at all. They basically just looked at a few Supreme Court cases dealing with liberty and privacy, you know, the right to send your kids to a parochial school, and the Griswold case dealing with birth control. They never looked at state court cases in which Supreme Courts categorically ruled in favor of the unborn child as a human being. They never once talked about them. So that's a big deficiency in Roe v. Wade, that they didn't look at court cases. They just completely ignored it, because they knew if they had looked at court cases, they would have found there's plenty of case law defending the unborn child's right to life. So I don't know how the court's going to rule in this case. All I know is that we need to be praying. We need to be praying very hard this next week, but especially on the 30th and the 1st. I know here in Kalamazoo, people are going to be gathering outside of Planned Parenthood most of the day up until like dusk on the 30th, and again on the 1st, that we storm heaven and beseech God that He would soften the hearts of these Supreme Court justices to make the right decision. The court needs to catch up with science and affirm the humanity of the unborn child, and that he or she deserves legal protection. So be praying. I'll see you next week. Goodbye.